My name is Aris Archontis, and in this video, I'm going to take you on a tour of my electric guitar recording setup. For years, my collaborators have urged me to share some of my workflow online, and I'm not only excited to share this video with you, but finally I have a channel and I will be uploading more content in the near future. A little bit about me: I'm a songwriter and producer in Los Angeles, California. I do an equal amount of electronic and acoustic music, and I have a passion for engineering and workflow. The result is my studio Archon, one of the most advanced recording environments in the world. Now, it's this passion for workflow, along with my need to get fast results without hindering creativity, that is the driving force behind the setup you're going to see today. It's been years in the making, constantly evolving and optimized little by little. It never really stops evolving, so I'm sure in a couple of years I'll do a follow-up video with the updated version of this setup. But for now, if you're like me and enjoy seeing how other people work, hopefully this video is right up your alley. There is a lot to cover, so let's start with the live room. So here we are in the live room, and behind me we have some of my cabinets. Some are old, some new, some combos. There are a few more combos around the room, and what I do with most of those is I separate the amp from the speaker cabinet itself. It is important for me to be able to tweak the amp in the control room while I record. Now let's talk about what I call the grid. 4 columns, 3 levels each, a cabinet on each level. On the custom mic stand, there are 3 identical groups of microphones corresponding to each cabinet level. I call these stations. So we have 3 on the grid, and there is a 4th one, which is free-floating, and you can see it on that tweed. Each of these stations has the same 4 microphones: a 57, a 421, a 409, and a 122. The custom mic stand is attached onto a rail that I can remotely move from the control room. There is also a camera that allows me to see where I'm at based on the white stickers per column. Looking at the mic stations, they each have a Dynamount. Their purpose is to move the microphones closer or further from the cabinets. So this is it for the live room. Before we move to the control room, I want to show you one more little thing. This is a little controller I have in the live room. It allows me to mix and match amplifiers with cabinets. If you look closely, this represents the grid. 4 columns, 3 levels. Now the cool thing is that all of these amplifiers are in the control room. And obviously the cabinets are next to me in the live room. We don't have to physically bring these to the live room to connect them. We can remotely mix and match any combination using this X-Keys controller. Now I'm not really a guitar player, but I can play enough to demonstrate this functionality. Also, we're recording with 2 room mics. There are no close mics. All right, so let's select the JMP50 into what I call a green. This is a late 60s Marshall with greenbacks. It sounds like this. Let's try a super lead. I think this is from '71, modified by Friedman. Let's try a Mojave. Now let's try a high watt into a high watt. Or a Showman into a tone tabby. And last, let's try this twin. This is a late 50s high-powered twin tweed. This is its own cabinet. This is a combo I separated. So there you have it. Let's go to the control room. This is my custom desk environment in the control room. I'm going to take you through the individual pieces that are being used when I record guitars, and afterwards I will show you how they all integrate together. Real quick, in case anyone is wondering, the reason I replaced the wood panels here with this metal mesh is because the mesh reduces reflections around 1 to 3K. So the main centerpiece is a crooked mastering console that acts as an I/O matrix, an insert switcher, and a monitor controller. Any of these inputs can be routed into two separate paths, A and B, and I can select and combine any of these inserts to these paths as I see fit. Here are the stereo inserts, and here are the mono ones. To the right of the crooked, I have a Studer A820 transport remote. I love the sound of tape on guitars, so that gets used a lot. To the far right, I have my joystick that controls the custom mic stand on the rail we saw earlier on in the live room, and to the far left, I have my main MIDI controller, which controls different devices depending on what my needs are at the time of use. Now, below the crooked console and the Studer remote, I have a large X-Keys controller on a movable platform along with my mouse and a fader port. I don't use a conventional computer keyboard because I can program the X-Keys buttons to do whatever I want. Each of these buttons performs multiple actions depending on how I press them, and they control both software and hardware. For example, just left of the spacebar, I have my talkback button. On the top right, I have my guitar amp and cabinet control system similar to the one I just showed you in the live room, but with additional capabilities. On the bottom, I have my DAW marker buttons, which also control my pedalboard if I hold them down for half a second. Speaking of my pedalboard, it's a little different from conventional designs. I needed maximum portability in the studio, so it was built on wheels to move effortlessly between the control room and the live room. For comfort, it is not designed to be used with your feet. When I process guitars, drums, or vocals through these pedals, I need literally hands-on control. And finally, regarding sound quality, after I picked the cable I wanted to use, it was clear that its size would cost me a significant amount of space if the switcher was to be placed on the front part of the pedalboard, as it's usually found in a traditional design. After all, I'm not using my feet, so by placing it in the back and having the cables extend slightly over the frame gave me extra space on the front for the pedals themselves. Now let's take a look at the amps. Alexa, turn amps on. All of my amps, microphones, speakers, equipment, and so on are controlled with this voice assistant. For example, if I say, Alexa, turn drums on, the power supplies for the microphones corresponding to the drums will turn on, and so on. You can buy these power strips anywhere, and you can program them to act this way either as a group or individually like this. Alexa, turn orange off. Alright, let's move on to the signal paths. As I mentioned earlier, each mic station has the same 4 microphones, a 57, a 421, a 122, and a 409. All these microphones go to these 4 1084 modules respectively, followed by 4 Betamaker equalizers before they feed an SSL Sigma mixer. Both the Betamaker EQs and the SSL Sigma are hardware analog units which can be controlled remotely through a plugin. The Betamaker EQs complement the Neves quite well because they offer me 2 bands of precise parametric equalization per microphone in case I need it. When not in use, I can turn them off completely since they have hardware bypass. That takes us to the MIDI controller, which in this scenario, I have it controlling the SSL Sigma mixer. Each of these 4 knobs correspond to the 4 faders you see on the screen, and allow me to control level and mute of each microphone, while the 4 knobs above control the panning. Don't let the plugin view confuse you. In short, these hardware knobs control the faders and panning of the SSL hardware mixer. Okay, that almost concludes the whole system walkthrough, but before we see it in action, there is one more thing I have to show you. Actually, it's my favorite out of everything I've shown you in this video so far. Let's say you have 3 amps in the control room and they're all connected to a switcher. In the live room, you have one cabinet and you place a microphone on it. The output of that microphone goes to a preamp, and the output of that preamp is actually what you're monitoring in the control room. Now, when you select any of those amps, let's say the Vox or the Diesel, you hear the amp you selected instantly in the control room because regardless of what amp you selected, you're still monitoring the output of that same mic in front of that same cabinet. But what happens when you have more than one cabinet? Let's say I want to select that high watt in the middle. If I select it, in the live room, the sound will come out of that cabinet as expected. But what about in the control room? Even after I mic those other two cabinets, as long as that first microphone in front of that first cabinet is connected to my preamp, I'm still listening to that one in the control room. So how do I listen to the rest of the cabinets I select? The traditional studio solution is to have a preamp per microphone, usually on a console, and have all these microphones come up on faders that you can mute or solo. That's what I used to do when I had a large console in here. Of course, it takes extra time to go through all the channels, and it's not a permanent setup since I need to change my inputs every time I need to record something else or mix. Another solution would be to use the same preamp but connect the corresponding microphone of the cabinet selected to that preamp manually on the patch bay. But that also takes time because you have to manually patch every time you switch cabinets. Well, what if you didn't have to patch anything manually? My solution is another custom unit that allows me to remotely route each microphone per cabinet into the input of the preamp that feeds my speakers in the control room. And I've programmed that capability to coincide with the cabinet switching you saw earlier in the large X-Keys controller. So now anytime I select a cabinet, the output of the microphone corresponding to that cabinet automatically goes through the preamp so I can audition the cabinet I selected in the control room. Of course, in my setup, I have 4 microphones per cabinet, but the functionality is identical. For the 3 mic stations per column and the freestanding 4th one, this capability is instant. In use, this is as close to a plugin as you can get in the real world with real tube amps. Any amp, any cabinet, any mic is just a press of a button away. Furthermore, this also allows me to effortlessly record multiple combinations and choose one at a later time or layer a few of them for even more sonic possibilities. Alright, it's time to see how it all works together in real time. At this point, I'll be introducing text so you can follow what's happening while hearing the sound. It is important this demonstration is done live in real time, so the cameras will be focusing on my hands. While we won't be seeing the amps in the control room, anytime I change from one to another, LED lights show me at a glance what amp is selected. With so many combinations, sometimes just looking at the amps and having visual feedback can be very helpful. I should also mention that the grid runs at 16 ohms. Okay, let's start with the JDM45 into the green. Everything you hear at this point is completely raw. You can hear that even with just the 57, the overall spectrum is pretty even with sufficient low end. That's because the mics are right up on the grill and proximity effect boosts the low end. Let's see if I move it back a few inches how it's gonna sound. Focus on the low end. We can hear how much thinner it sounds. Let's blend the royer halfway through. Okay, much better. Now let's swap the 409 with the 57 again halfway through. Let's move the mics a little closer to the grill, but not right on it, so we can still keep the royer blended. Now let's change some amps. Pretty straightforward since we're using the same cabinet. Now let's do the same thing but switch cabinets too. Per the custom system I showed you earlier, not only will the mics automatically change with their corresponding cabinet, they will also keep the microphone blend in the mixer intact. Let's try the 57 with the Royer this time around. All right, now you're starting to see the power of this system. Let's switch back to the JDM45 and let's introduce the extreme opposite, the AC30. Pretty different. Even though my AC30 has the top boost module edit, which I installed in the normal channel, I'm using the Brilliant channel here to accentuate differences. With the top boost module, the amps can sound much more similar, so it wouldn't be as much fun to compare. Let's try moving the mics to the center of the cone. Much better. Now let's go to column 1 where the Vox cabinet lives. Here is column 2. Here is column 1. Let's start with the Vox, see what else is on this column, and let's change some mics too. The Bogner sounds pretty dark and bassy. Before we mute the Royer or move the mics back, let's try the JDM45 halfway through. Pretty extreme as expected. Okay, so this is the basic demonstration of the setup. Now, what happens if I want to use more microphones, especially condensers, which I love on guitars? We have two options. One is the automatic one, and the other one I call semi-automatic. The automatic one uses the custom unit that switches the 4 mics on the 4 mic stations, 16 mics total. But instead, we patch any mics we want. They don't have to be the ones in the mic stations. Now, the semi-automatic option does not rely on the custom unit, but instead uses the SSL Sigma mixer. In this scenario, we keep all the 16 mics in the 4 mic stations intact and add new mics along with those. Let's see how it looks in the live room. Here we can see the 3 mic stations on the grid in column 1. Down here I have the 4th mic station on a 3rd power cabinet. And now for our additional mics, we have a 67 in front of the Vibroverb. And up here on top of the piano, where these little guys are usually parked, another 67 on the 59 Deluxe and a 47 on the 66 Princeton Reverb. In the control room, the additional mics are patched into the SSL Sigma, so all I need to do is raise these faders right here, and we're good to go. With the 3 extra mics we added, we now have 19 mics and 16 cabinets at our fingertips. At this point, I'm going to use the first part of this DI recording because it's cleaner and will be perfect to demonstrate the room mics and pedalboard functionality. Let's listen to the Vibroverb. You can hear the scooped quality of the JBL, a very distinct sound which I like very much for some stuff. Let's fade in the room. If you see closely above the fader in the SSL Sigma window, the room is going to path B, whereas the close mics go to path A. Earlier on, I talked about how each mic has a separate Betamaker EQ after the NIV module in case I want to EQ anything individually before they get summed and are treated together. We're not using those now, but the two big ones you can see here correspond to path A for the top and path B for the bottom. Now that's along with all these inserts here on the crooked. So let me select path B, and after we hear the beta maker, we'll engage a pair of BA6As halfway through. Let me mute the close mic. Let's take a listen. Okay, so let's say we want to give it some body. All right, now halfway through, I'm going to engage the BA6As. Let's blend it in with a close mic. I'm exaggerating for demonstration purposes, but you get the idea. Now let's look at the pedal board. If you remember what I said earlier, the marker buttons also control the pedal board. So while the vibroverb has reverb in it, instead I will use a mid-60s Fender spring tank so other amps can use it too. Let's take a listen. Okay, let's try a couple more amps in this configuration. And let's also go to the grid and try the high-powered twin tweed. I can change up to 10 pedals from my position here. Let's try a clone halfway through. The position of these pedals can change depending on the application, something I can do directly on the Gigrig G2 switcher without having to rewire them. But what's usually constant is that I use an Eventide H9 in the last spot. And along with everything else, that is also a unit I can control remotely from this page right here. Let's check it out. Or for example, we can throw a flanger in there. You get the idea. All right, so that's that. Before we wrap up, there is one final thing I want to show you, and that's how the system would be used in a real tracking session. For this demonstration, I laid down some drums and bass. I wanted a bit of a chunky sound, so the kit I played is an early 40s Slingerland Radio King with a 26-inch kick and 7-inch snare. It sounds like this. Let me open the folder real quick and show you what's inside. I'll do a drum video soon, but just as an overview, there are about 40 mics on this kit. Of course, I'm not using all of them. I think in this case I'm using 6 or 7. The reason I do this is because I want to focus on the source. what type of kick, snare, tuning, muffling, selecting cymbals, and so on. I don't want to have to worry about the recording side of it. Wide overheads or mono or a mess, close rooms or far rooms, dark ribbons compared to bright condensers. I just record all of them and I can mix and match as I please after the fact. I do the same thing with the bass. Besides the DI, I record two rigs, an Ampeg SVT and an Aguilar. In this case, I did not record the Aguilar, but the SVT sounds like this. To make things simple, we'll just use the 59 Deluxe and the 66 Princeton for this demonstration. We'll be recording the middle part along with the last one on the right, which I'll use as a double. Let's start with the Deluxe and throw some inserts on it halfway through using the crooked mastering console. I don't know if you've noticed, but the reason you've been listening to all this without seeing any track being recorded or armed in the DAW is because I use a DSP system bypassing the DAW completely. This allows me to put this delay plugin you see on the far left on the mix bus. I mentioned earlier how much I like tape on guitars, but if I want to hear it while I'm recording, I'll need to monitor the repro head, which means there is a delay due to the distance from the record head. This delay solves this problem. Let's record this now and move it to two new tracks panned left and right. Let's do the same with the Princeton while trying a different set of inserts. By Pultec strip, by the way, I mean EQP1A, MEQ5, and HLF3 all daisy-chained to make the Pultec strip. The bottom two are for stereo sources and mix bus duties. Let's record this too and put it into another playlist on our stereo track. Okay, now before we listen, if I press this button right here, I'm now sending my whole mix through these inserts. So just for fun, let's engage at 2254 and let's put the whole thing through tape since it's running already. Let me turn off the delay and compare the two amps. And that brings us to the end. There is one more thing I wanted to cover, and I'll do it in a follow-up video. It's not really a secret, but the fact that there are hundreds of amp comparison videos online with thousands of people commenting on what they like shows me that most people don't really understand what I'm going to address next time. Let me just say that after my next video, most of those amp comparison ones will become obsolete. And I don't mean philosophically as in you have to be in the same room or anything like that. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.